Hello and welcome back to another tutorial. Today we'll be making a card component and we'll be looking at different ways that you can use the card component as the design systems consumer. For inspiration, I'll be using Betterment, a robo-advisor app. This is a screenshot from their settings page. So yeah, let's create an empty Figma file and get started. So it looks like our card here is going to have three parts to it. It's going to have a card header, a body, and a card footer. And looks like our card header and footer are pretty predictable. So the card header has just a header, the title, and the footer is a link. As for the body, it looks like we could have either a table or we could have text, and then who knows what else we might have. So we want to make sure we keep it pretty flexible. So first, let's start with creating our card header. I'm going to create a text layer, say card header. And I'm going to use one of these Figma colors here that come with any Figma file, and I'll set it to gray 2, second gray, and then I had it set to semi-bold by default, so we'll just keep it at that. And now we can take this text layer and drop it inside the auto layout frame. I'm going to remove the horizontal spacing, and I'm going to add maybe 20 for the vertical one, and from here I'm going to add just a bottom border, and I'll keep it very light gray, like gray 5. So now I can resize this frame, and as you can see, the bottom border resizes with it. So that's our card header, and now we can do our card footer. For the footer, I'm going to first I just copy this frame, and I'm going to update the border to the top, and then this, we can keep it a little smaller, let's say 14 pixels, and we can make it regular font weight, and let's rename it to card footer, and looks like it's always going to be a link, so we can just keep it blue. So now we can rename this layer to card header, this one is to card footer, and we can create multiple components. Now we're going to create our card component itself. So I'm going to grab an instance of the card header, instance of the card footer, and now I'm just gonna do like a placeholder for card body, and for the card body I'm going to wrap it into auto layout, and I'm going to combine these 3 layers in their own overall auto layout frame, and then set the spacing to 0. And now, just so it looks a little bit more like a card, I'm going to give it a fill of white, and then do vertical padding to 8 and horizontal to 16, and we can always adjust it later. Then I'm going to give it a border radius of maybe 4. And then I also want a very subtle shadow. So I'm going to go to Effects, click the plus, and then I can play around with it just to make it much more subtle than what it currently is. And from here I'm going to adjust the card body. I'm going to remove the horizontal padding, and I'll increase the vertical to maybe 16. And for the card header, card body, card footer, I want them to always fill the container, so that when we resize the card, they fill it in. And from here, I'm going to rename our frame to card, and I'm going to turn it into a component. Now let's talk about the card body. So we don't really know what can go in there. It looks like we can have a table or we can have text. Maybe there are some use cases that we're not even aware of, and that's pretty common for cards. So one thing that usually ends up happening is that we create a card component, then we don't really know what can go inside its content, and we write something like detach me, so that when a designer is using an instance of this component, They just detach the card and add whatever they want in there. And the reason they need to detach is because currently there's no way in Figma to keep an instance of a component while passing in like whatever you want, kind of like React has children, like Figma does not have that. And while this is not ideal, that's certainly an option. There is, however, a workaround that we can use that will improve our card component, but it does require your designers to have some knowledge of how to work with components and instance swapping. So let's take a look at this one now. So what I'm going to do, I'm going to go back here. I will call it like card body slot. And I want to make it look more like a placeholder and less like a part of the component itself. So what I'm going to do is wrap it into auto layout, fill the container, center it, and now I'm going to give it, let's say, a fill of grayish, and I'll give it a stroke, a dashed stroke. So something that looks like it has to be like cut out of this card and replaced with something else, with the actual content. And from here, I actually want to take this one out, turn it into its own component. Let's say card body slot. And now I'm going to take an instance of it, place it back inside our card body. And now we have a slot. So how can we use the slot? Let's say I'll take an instance of the card, and if we inspect this, we can see that since we made it in its own component, and this is just an instance of the slot, I could technically replace it with any other component that I want. That will allow me to modify the content of the card any way that I want without having to detach the card. And then if, let's say, our main card component gets updated, like we have an 8-pixel border radius instead of 4 pixels, I can still get those updates. So that's where the tricky part comes in. It means that whichever content I want to be in place of the card body slot needs to be a component. Fortunately, we have local components in Figma, so I can kind of make one-off components with content, and I can keep them local so they will not get published and they will not clutter the rest of the component library. So let's test this out. Let's say I want to do something like this, a table. So now I'm just going to quickly recreate this table. Okay, so that's going to be my table, and let's move it back here. So now I'm going to turn this into a local component. And by local, again, we mean that we don't want it to accidentally get published and be visible in other files. So to make it local, you're going to prefix the name of the component either with a dot or with an underscore. And then I can just make something very specific, like address table. And so now I can go to the slot and I can search for address table, which is actually right here. And it's going to be right inside this component. And if I resize it, it automatically resizes. Now, if I were to make any updates to the main component, let's say change background color, all the changes get automatically inherited to this card. Of course, this is a bit more advanced version of using the card component, but the good thing is that if somebody still does not feel very comfortable like creating their own local components and then like swapping it out, and if they just want to work directly within the card, they could still get an instance of it and detach the card and then delete the slot, add in their own like text layer, or create a card body right inside the card itself. And while they will not get updates to the card itself, kind of like the fill, the border radius, the shadow, remember that we still have separate components for card header and card footer. So as long as these components are not detached, and there is really no reason to detach like card header or card footer when you're changing the card body, like they would still get updates to this component parts. For example, I can return to the main component of card header And let's say we want it to be, I don't know, purple. So now when I go back, the card header component is purple, even though the card itself is detached. And the reason for that is that we still have our instances of the card header and card footer. Let's review what we currently have. So we have a component for a card header and the card footer. We also have a card body slot component. And this one, as you can see, I added a prefix of underscore, which means it's local. Maybe we want to make our card header and card footer local as well, just so that nobody can use them on its own. Now, let's say a couple months have passed. We made this card component and we realized that, yeah, maybe our very common use cases are just having either like a text as our content or a table. We can still keep our default variant with slot to remain flexible, but we can add a couple variants as well, one with the table and one with text. So let's return to our card component, and I'm going to create another variant, and this one is going to be for text. So I'm going to create a copy of just the text layer, delete the slot. We can set our text color to, let's say, gray 2, and let's rename this to just card body. So now let's test it out. We're going to grab an instance and let's see what's going to happen. So what happens is that our text overflows and we don't want to do that. So what we can do to our main component, we can modify this text layer. Instead of hugging the contents, we'll set it to fill the container. And as you can see, our instance, which has way more text, updated, and now the text just drops to the second and third line. Now let's create a variant for our table. So maybe as we look at the use cases of using the table inside the card, we realize that we only really have 2 columns and we have 7 rows at most. Maybe we want to have at most 7 rows, just so it's not too overwhelming. So in this case, it's pretty simple and we can have a table variant that doesn't require too much maintenance. So what we're going to do now is create this table variant, and we're actually going to create the table component first, kind of like we did with the body slot, and then we're going to create a new variant for the card with the table instance inside it. So I'm going to create a text layer. Let's say this one is label, and we'll make it this gray color. Then I'll copy it. This one is going to be value, and I'll group them together in a row. And then I will duplicate this row, combine these 2 together in auto layout, and change the spacing to 4. And so what I'm going to do now, I'm going to select these 2 rows and change to space in between. But they still don't resize together with the table. So what we're going to do now is set them to fill the container. And now they resize. So now we can copy this a few more times till we have 7 of them. And that's going to be our card body table. And we'll turn this into a component. Now we're going to add one more variant for the card. And take this instance. And we can remove this text. And we'll set this to fill. So now let's take an instance of the card with the table, and it resizes as expected. And then if somebody was using this table and they only needed 3 rows, they can just go ahead and delete the ones that they don't need. And by delete, I mean they would just technically hide them, and they have the table. Now let's clean up our Figma file. I'm going to delete all the test stuff that we don't need, and I'm just going to move the card body table over here, and I'm going to add auto layout to the card component set itself, just so it's easier to maintain in the future. And maybe I'll change it to be in a row. And the important thing that we have left to do here is that we still have the property name as property 1, and then default variant 2, variant 3. So we're going to rename the property to content slot text, and table. So one of the reasons we didn't add this variance early on is because sometimes when you're just creating a new component, it's very hard to tell how it's going to be used. And trying to guess all the variants early on makes the whole job much more complicated than it needs to be. And it definitely increases the maintenance of the component. So sometimes it's better to create a very light version of the component, and then as you start uncovering more patterns, maybe adding more variants. So that's about it for this card component. As always, after you create a component, it's a good idea to go and test it out with real examples. And in my case here, I'm just going to recreate all the cards that I had on the screenshot to make sure that my card component fits all of them nicely. And yeah, you could either watch this part, it's gonna be pretty boring, but I'm gonna do it anyway, or you can just skip ahead. Okay, so I'm going to take instance of the card, and this first one is going to be address, so I'm going to set the content to table. And by the way, if let's say I had a use case where I had more than 7 rows in the table, in this case I can either detach a card and then detach this table component to add a bit more rows, or I can keep the slot card instance and just do it the same way as I showed before in the video with using just the local component swap. But in this case, it's only like 5 rows, so we can just use that. And this one, so as you can see in the example here, I don't have anything here. So one thing I can do, I can delete it again, meaning hide it, because you see it's still here, but then it brings the address line in the center. I don't want that. So one way, there are 2 ways to go about it. One way, I can set it to packed and make sure that the address line remains justified to the start, or instead of hiding the value completely, I can just change the opacity to 0, and this way I don't have to change any of the auto layout properties. Okay, this one is city. And I don't need these 2 rows, so this one is address. So next one is going to be phone number, very simple. The trusted contact is also a text. And one thing, so our cards are a bit too narrow, so we're going to combine them. And we'll set it to fill the container, and we'll just make our overall column a little bit wider, maybe around like 440. So one thing that I can kind of tell comparing to the screenshot here is that they definitely have more horizontal padding on their cards, and also for their text the line height is a little bigger. So I'm going to go ahead to my card component, and first I will increase it to 160, so it's a little bigger. And I'm also going to select all of the instances and change horizontal padding to around 24. And the last thing, it looks like they have more spacing in the card body as well, both for table and text. So I will update that as well. It's still probably not identical, but it's getting there. So that was our first column. And now we're going to do our second column. this card bigger. So second one here is text. Digital. Actually, that's interesting. Here they have, it looks like the text here is slightly indented, but here and here it's not. So I'll just keep it aligned with the title. So this also should be a link. And one thing I can see here is that they have spacing between their paragraphs, and here we don't. So one thing I could do, have an extra line here, but actually what we can do in Figma instead, we can set which spacing we want between paragraphs. So maybe we can do something like 16. And the last card that we have, it's actually going to be a table with just one row. So this will also combine into a column. Set it to 24 and fill container. And now we can combine these two together. So aside from some spacing differences, the cards are very similar, and our main card component fits all the use cases that we have here, but admittedly they are pretty simple use cases. But if you have any examples of cards that get more complex than that and you'd like to see how they could be built out, please let me know and I would love to tackle that challenge. Like always, I'm going to leave the link to this Figma file in the description, and if you enjoyed this tutorial, please make sure to subscribe so that I know that you liked it and that I can keep on creating more of this. Also, let me know if you have any questions, and I'll see you next time. Bye bye.